So welcome everybody to University of Wyoming, Laramie County Extension Gardening for Success program. And tonight I've got Dr. Randa Jabbour and her grad student Samantha Nobes. And we're going to talk about pollinators, cut flower production, and how the two of them have crossed over, and some of the results and interesting things that these two ladies have come across. So I'm going to turn it over to Randa, and it's your show. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I just let me know if give signs or whatever, or speak up if you're having trouble hearing me. It seems like I have a good internet today, so I think it'll be okay. I wanted to start off by introducing myself because my position at the University of Wyoming is primarily research and teaching undergraduate students. And so I don't do a lot of extension. I don't do a lot of collaboration with master gardeners, but I know that you probably know many of my colleagues in plant sciences, like Karen Panter and Chris Hilgert and Bill Stump and a lot of those great folks. I'm in the same department as them. And it's just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Syracuse, New York and central New York, and went to school not too far from there in Rochester, and then did my graduate studies at Penn State University. And then between then and moving to Wyoming, I also lived and worked in Eastern Washington and Maine. So moved around a lot, and landed here because I got a great job at the university. So we've been here 7 years now, and really love it. It's been a great fit for us. I'm here with my husband. I have 2 kids, some chickens, some fish, and my husband's honeybees. So I know some of you are beekeepers, and it's been, for me, not my main hobby, but he is really excited about it and has gone to the bee college and things like that. So, okay. So when, in terms of my research and what I focus on, my big goal is to use ecological interactions to design sustainable agriculture systems. I'm trained as an ecologist. I'm really interested in how different things in the environment interact with each other. And so this is really the big goal that I always try to address with the work that I do and that the students who work with me do. Primarily, I do a lot of work on pest management. So a lot of my field time is spent in alfalfa fields. So we're really interested in learning more about non-pesticide ways to manage pests in alfalfa, to improve sustainability of that cropping system. And through that work, we have started to do more and more where we want to understand, how is it also impacting bees, whether it's honeybees or native bees. And so we've been starting to do more projects that include that as a dimension. So another thing I'm really interested in is the importance of biodiversity and understanding how that affects ecosystem services. And so the work today is the result of a collaboration between myself and Dr. Karen Panter and the graduate student that we co-advise, Samantha Nobes, who's on this call too. And so she'll be, she's waving, and I don't know, Sam, do you want to take a moment and just introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, so I'm Sam. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I worked on a small produce farm for about 9 years. I came to Wyoming and started doing the agroecology major, and then went into the master's program and started working with the cut flowers. So that's what I've been working on so far.
Thanks. And yeah, and Sam is like typical busy student. So she's in classes and she's a TA where she's helping teach a horticulture class this semester. And she's still finishing up this season's experiment in the high tunnels and was out collecting data today. And so when Catherine invited us to present, we kind of agreed that I would take the lead on giving this talk to you all, and then she will like chime in and be available to answer questions so that we can do the best job we can at answering your questions. And we really do appreciate the invitation. Sorry, I usually start off that way, but I was flustered. Thank you for inviting us to share our work, Catherine. It's really nice to be able to let people know what we've been doing in Laramie. So the work I'm going to share with you today is funded by the Wyoming Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Program. And so our colleague, Karen Panter, who some of you probably know, she's the one who originally started this project. It's her project looking at better understanding best ways to produce specialty cut flowers in our climate. And I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how I came to be involved, but it basically was through Sam's work. And her, she had worked with me in the past, and so she knew, she had done some work involving pollinators. She knew about plant-insect interactions and how important they were. And, basically while collecting all this data on cut flowers, as you can see in this picture right here, was just seeing tons of bees and other insects on all of these flowers. And so we started working together to do kind of an add-on to this project that explored that dimension. So if you're not familiar with the cut flower industry, it is valued at $374 million in 2018. So it's an important part of our sort of, green floriculture industry in the United States. But really relies heavily on imports. When you think about going and getting flowers from your florist or from the grocery store, a lot of those are imported from outside of the United States. And so there's kind of this interest in what kind of local production is possible that might be able to contribute to this industry. And so what, might be from a Wyoming agriculture perspective, is there the opportunity for people in Wyoming to grow and sell cut flowers to diversify their markets and their offerings? And so lots of potential markets, whether it be wholesale through farmers markets, as part of a CSA kind of subscription, U-pick operations, right? A lot of really interesting opportunities to sell cut flowers. And so that was, the motivation for this initial project. And you see here flowers that we'll be talking a bit more about when we get into it, but these are all flowers from Samantha's experiment. So specialty cut flowers are things that are, not necessarily available on a regular basis. They don't usually ship well. They might have a short post-harvest life. And they're things that are not, roses or some of those kind of standard cut flowers that we would think about. They can be used fresh or dried, and you can use, different parts of them in creating arrangements or other things. And so for the project that Karen and Samantha worked on, the motivation again was to diversify Wyoming's economic base and to demonstrate, whether it would be feasible and how it would be most feasible to grow 5 of these specialty cut flower species, and to find out information that's really regionally specific. So this is research that was done in Laramie, Wyoming. So at our elevation, in our climate, what does it actually look like when you try to grow these flowers? So I'm going to go through and talk about the main cuts here that Samantha works with. And I'll also just pause and see if she wants to chime in any interesting factoids, because, at my heart, I've turned into an alfalfa person. And so she does know a lot more about the cut flower industry. So we'll start with these 3. So you can see Calendula officinalis, which I think, to me, calendula was one of the flowers that I was familiar with before this project. And it's in that Asteraceae family. And then one of the flowers that was new to me in this project is Helichrysum. And you can see these little pictures up above. It comes in, the variety that they were using came in also several different colors. So that you can see the different colors. And already you see many of the pictures that Sam has, of course, also have insects on them. Lots of insects. This flower, I think the common name is straw flower. And I don't know if you can hear this. that kind of dry, like straw, like sound. But basically, when you cut it, it makes that sound. And so it's called straw flower. It already kind of feels dry, but it dries really nicely. So don't look too carefully at mine because I wasn't like very intentional about it, but I saved a few, and it keeps color, which is really nice. And so it's a really nice one if you're interested in dry flowers as well. And then this third one right here is an ornamental docus. So it's carrot, right? This is a carrot flower. And you can see though that you've got these different colors, and it's really quite beautiful, and not something that I was familiar with. I didn't realize that there were carrots that you could grow in this way and get these different beautiful colors of the flowers. Sam, before I go on, do you want to say anything more about these three?
Yeah, so those first two, the calendula and helichrysum, is what you would consider a mass flower for a floral arrangement. So they have that kind of big open flower, and they would be like the main part of an arrangement. And then the docus would be considered a filler flower, so it has kind of those more delicate, smaller flowers. So that would be part of the filler section of an arrangement.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce these two, or are you enjoying hearing me do my best?
And if you guys have questions, feel free to interrupt me on these, but these would be considered line flowers. So we have the celosia and the matthiola, and these both also come in a range of colors. So another two interesting ones.
Yeah, and they are really, again, as a person who doesn't know a lot about the cut flower industry, I mean, these all were both new to me. These are not flowers I see, you know, around town a lot, or in people's gardens. And so it's been really interesting to get to know them better. And I really love these celosia. They're really beautiful, and maybe not that easy to see in the picture, but the stalks themselves are often the same color as the flower part. So it's a really, again, a really just cool looking flower. All right.
So Samantha?
I have got a question, Catherine,
Yeah.
when you get a chance.
Sure, go ahead, Vance.
And thanks for putting this on, Catherine. I grew up in the Denver area, and back in the, this will date me, back in the 50s and 60s and through the 70s, carnation growing was a big business in the Denver metropolitan area. It just went away. And I guess carnations are imported by airline now from, I guess, South America. But do you have any information of what happened to the carnation business, or is that outside the scope of your presentation?
So I would just say that you're correct. I mean, the export and import thing is happening now because it's cheaper labor, cheaper energy in those areas that are near the equator. So it just made sense for that production to kind of go there. And that's kind of why we're looking at specialty cut flowers now, as we're moving away from the traditional roses and carnations and trying to get this diversity and variety into local markets. So you're right on track with the import.
So Vance, I can add to that. I grew up in Arvada, Colorado. And so that was kind of the heart of the carnation business.
Yes.
Was in Arvada. We had a series of hailstorms come through that, and those were all glass greenhouses or the thick rigid plastic. It took them out, and a lot of them didn't have insurance. And so just force of nature, really. And it was very sad. I can remember after that storm going around to some of those greenhouses, and they were just devastated. That was like the final push. And then the land started to become so valuable that, you know, they were being forced out by property taxes. So there's a lot of factors that kind of rolled into that. So yeah. One thing I'd like to ask both Randa and Samantha, as you're going along talking about these gorgeous flowers, because I have a lot of master gardeners on here and I have some non-master gardeners. But could you talk a little bit about how to grow these and maybe some of the requirements? Because not everybody has a high tunnel to do these in. And of course, most of us aren't trying to grow stuff at 7,200 feet either. So, but if you could talk a little bit about growing conditions, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Sam, is that something that you want to tackle right now in terms of maybe non-high tunnel? So Sam definitely focused on high tunnel and greenhouse. So she didn't have anything that was open field, but I think she probably could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as production, we sowed seeds and transplanted. We did containerized growing. So, I mean, we just followed standard practices. We did, you know, different fertilizers and that kind of stuff, but it's just the normal growing season. So if anyone has like a specific question, I could answer that.
Okay. So yeah, I'll try, and we'll try to incorporate that as we go through for sure. Okay. So yeah, these were the main cuts. And again, this main question was, you know, what's feasible here? And so this is a picture taken from the greenhouse production. And so you can see it's winter and we have these really beautiful flowers, which is an accomplishment. Oh, I guess well, I'll come back to it. You know, one of the things that I think production wise that is important is that with this Matthiola, when you cut it, it doesn't really grow back. So Sam would get like one cut from the plant, you know, one stem of it, and that was it. Whereas with all of the other types that we mentioned, she would get great regrowth repeatedly throughout the season. And I will show some of that data where you can see just like, I think you have some of that number of stems and things like that. But I do think that's one notable thing where if you do want it for cut flowers, I think knowing that the Matthiola will not grow back in the same way as the other ones, I think is really important to note. Okay. So here are some pictures of what the experiment looked like set up in the greenhouse and set up in the high tunnel. So they would, you know, randomize location of where these different flowers were and use zinnias as border plantings. So you can see zinnias there too. And here's Sam cutting her flowers. It's really beautiful. And you can see sort of the different, I think, growth, you know, habits of them. And again, that they did do them in containers. And that did make it, I think, gave you some flexibility in starting them early indoors and then moving them out when it was a suitable time to move them out. And so they did get started indoors. And you can see the high tunnel setup here too. Their main goals were to assess yield and quality of 5 cut flower species and quantify differences between growing environments. And these are just some pictures of utilization of the flowers. So in the first year of the experiment, our student farm sold them through CSA shares at the farmer's market. And then in 2019, they were sold to a working florist in town, Killian's. And so you can see some pictures here of wedding flower arrangements that include some of these flowers. So it was exciting, I think, that, you know, Killian's and the student farm, you know, they bought these flowers. It wasn't a donation. And so through this project, you know, they part of it is part of this Wyoming, this funding avenue is that they want you to build in selling some of your product through this Wyoming Department of Ag grant. And so it was great, I think, to see them utilized by a local florist. I think that really demonstrated that there is interest. And I don't know, Sam, do you want to say a bit about just that relationship and kind of what you heard or like any feedback about selling these flowers to the local florist?
Yeah, I know.
Sam, I need to interrupt briefly. But can you either speak louder or get closer to your mic or turn it up? Because you're a little faint.
Yeah, my microphone must be not so great because that happens, but I have it turned all the way up, so hopefully you can hear me. I know Killian's really enjoyed using the flowers. We brought them every week to them, so they were you know, kept wanting more and more, and they used them in weddings, and they used them in university events and things like that as well. So I think they really enjoyed having them.
Any questions? I figure if people want. Okay, and then these are some of the general recommendations that came out of Sam's work. So Daucus, the carrot, the ornamental carrot, did really well in both greenhouse and high tunnel, had longer stem lengths. So in that earlier picture, it was the flower that was often like popping out over the top. It was much taller. And stem length is very important for the cut flower world. This is what I learned from collaborating with Karen, is that stem length is one of the metrics they use. Like, is it marketable, basically? And I think if you're selling at a farmer's market or something, there's probably a lot more flexibility around that than when you're selling maybe to a florist who needs a certain stem length to work with for the arrangements. Helichrysum also did well in both environments, had longer stem lengths in the greenhouse and more stems per plant in the greenhouse. So there are some differences in how it does in these different environments. Celosia and Calendula produced more stems in high tunnels, but had longer stems in the greenhouse. And again, this is just that reiterating that Mathiola would produce one stem per plant, and that was what you got, basically. So it could be used in a successional planting, but it would not give you sort of season-long blooms. So
I do have a question for you ladies. You know, because I also grow in a high tunnel, and what I find is that the plants themselves, it doesn't matter whether I'm trying to grow flowers or vegetables, but they all stretch. They're all trying to reach for that light. And do you think that's an advantage to your cut flower program, is to have that them trying to reach for more light and thus elongating that stem? Because, you know, outside it would be a normal stem length. You wouldn't get that length. Just thought, I mean.
Oh, I think, are you muted, Sam, or no? Okay. I can't hear her. Can you hear her, Catherine?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now.
Better.
All right.
Faint.
Just to comment on that a little bit, when you're working in protected environments like the greenhouses and high tunnels, you're getting a different light intensity because of those coverings. So while you may be getting a longer stem length, there's different parameters to go with marketability. So you also want a strong stem. So if it's elongating like that and you're not getting as strong of a stem, you can decrease the quality. And it also may affect the flower size and things like that. So we didn't measure those parameters, but that is something to think about.
So yeah, I know with research that you get one question answered and then 10 more questions pop up from it. So it's never ending. But it's just my observation of 15 years in a production greenhouse growing vegetables, and you know, things stretch, you know, 10-foot tall corn, you know, that's just weird. But yeah, so I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so we'll get into the pollinator piece now a bit. As many of you know, insects provide beneficial services, right? They're not only pests. Most insects are providing many different beneficial services. And here we focused on pollinators. So it's been an interesting thing because cut flowers, you know, I think when someone's just focusing on, you know, how do we best produce cut flowers, and they're growing stuff from seed, they might not be that interested in like the pollination service, right? The seed producing or fruit producing service. But having those flowers in your ecosystem can still help support insect communities, even if that's not your main goal. And so many food crops depend on pollination. And so the idea is like, well, if someone's trying to grow these cut flowers amongst a diversified farming system, maybe they are doing diversified vegetables or fruits for whatever kind of market, having these might help also support that pollination service on their farm. And so I'm really interested in this idea of like multifunctionality, right? Like maybe you want to grow these cut flowers to market them, but perhaps they could be providing some other benefit to you, and that would be really interesting to learn more about. So this is a picture from Sam's experiment in 2018. And I don't know if, again, if you like want to try to like squint at your computer and see how many insects you can spot. But it was just an example of what she was seeing out there when she was doing the first year of this experiment. And these arrows are actually all pointing to different insects that are on these flowers. And so it includes, right, some of her experimental species and then also some of these zinnias on the border. And so at that point in time, Samantha was not a grad student yet. She was working part-time, I think, for Karen and working part-time for me on a different project. I think she had like several jobs. And she just said to me kind of on the side, she was like, yeah, it's really interesting. There's tons of bees and stuff that are going to these flowers. And so it was that observation that sort of led to this project of really trying to characterize, well, are some of them much more attractive than others? Because one of the things I had heard about from colleagues was that, you know, some ornamental plantings, some flowers that we are just planting for ornamental reasons, there are a bunch of ornamentals out there that actually don't do a great job of necessarily supporting bees. And some are much more, you know, just from my observations in my yard, I know certain plants that the honeybees tend to utilize, and then there's other plants where I see more utilization from native bees. And so I think, you know, we can't really make assumptions about what's going to be good for these different groups of bees, you know, depending on what your priority is. And so it really was neat to just look carefully and see what is actually coming and visiting these flowers here in Laramie. So in her following 2 years, she added that into the project.
Do I have to ask another question?
Yeah.
After the flowers are cut, how long does the pollen production and or nectar production continue?
That's a really good question. Sam, do you have any comment on that?
Honestly, don't know the answer to that. It's a good
Yeah,
question.
it's a really good question. What?
Make up a number and I'll believe it.
Well, I will say, so I don't know the answer either, but I think that will be something we write down and find out the answer to, because I think it's a really interesting question. A few weeks ago, before we had this snowstorm, I went and cut a bunch of flowers from Samantha's experiment, and I had a bucket, and I was sitting out front in my yard with my youngest son, and we were making arrangements and ball jars. And bees were totally coming to these flowers, you know, while we were doing the arrangements in our yard. And I thought that to myself. I thought, I wonder if I left these in a bucket out front, like how long something would come and visit them. And I don't know the answer at all, but I think it's a really good question.
Sounds like a grant for further study.
The next grant. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting idea, but yeah, so it's good to be stumped. That's what helps us learn new things. So thank you for the question.
Well, thanks for taking the question.
Yeah. So, yeah, so Sam used 2 different methods. And with pollinator research, these are especially timed observations, pretty standard. They're quite logical and they almost sound like too simple, but basically the timed observations consist of looking at a patch of flowers for a certain amount of time and recording how many visitors you're getting, and to the best that you can, either just visually IDing them, identifying them. And so for us, those are categories like bumblebees, honeybees, other native bees. I'll show you some of the other categories. So they're not super specific, but it still gives us a sense of some of these different groups. And then sometimes people will couple this with collection, and scientists will actually collect some of the things that they're seeing. We did not do that much the first year because we just wanted to do our visual observations. And that's most of what we'll be sharing with you. So are some of these course categories. And then Samantha also added this video recording technique because she saw, you know, that the way the insects are interacting with the flowers is different depending on the insect. And some of them are spending a much longer time on a flower, and others might just like come quickly and then leave. And so she wanted a way to be able to sort of characterize that. How are these different, you know, how long are they on the flower? How are they moving on the flower? Things like that. So that's what you can see. There are some cameras that basically will just record flowers for a couple hours, and then she goes through and watches these videos. And it's actually really fun to watch. If you like watching bees on flowers normally, that's still fun to watch them on these videos. So she has a couple different techniques that she's using to evaluate this. And like I mentioned, these are the three main categories that we break the bees up into. And after this summer, we'll have a much, I think, better idea about the different types of native bees that we're seeing. But there are a bunch of different ones. So we've got a lot of so I'm assuming most of the bumblebees are probably the Hunt's bumblebee, which is pretty common in Laramie. I'm not sure how much other bumblebees are visiting these flowers. Interestingly, we have not seen a lot of honeybees on these flowers. And so every year when I look at Sam's data, I say, but are you seeing honeybees? Because this is in Laramie. A lot of people keep honeybees. And I just think these cultivars have not, you know, with all of her observations, she's seen honeybees there, but it's been a much smaller proportion than the native bees and the bumblebees. So just something to note, I think if you are a beekeeper who's looking for new flower ideas for honeybees, our data don't show that these are your next best bet. Sam, is that fair to say? I think if you were like a honeybee person?
Definitely fair to say. And
Yeah.
I only see them really early on and really late when they are there, so.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, so some of it might be, if she's mostly seeing them early season, that there might not be a lot of other stuff in the area. And then once other things are in bloom, perhaps they're more attractive to the honeybees than these cultivars specifically. I also don't know if honeybees are weird about going in high tunnels. I don't think that would be it, but because she rolls up the sides. I don't know if you saw that in the picture. The sides are rolled up. That's how they're getting in there. That's a very important point I forgot to say.
More time trying to get out than looking at the flowers.
Bees in general or honeybees in particular?
Honeybees in particular.
You just see them flying around but not really using the flowers?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have two comments. Actually, I have a comment and a question. One, because honeybees orientate themselves with the sun, the plastic covering in the high tunnel, because it diffuses the light and sometimes it's usually opaque, really confuses them, and they just go up to the top of it and bounce around and try to find their way out, hopefully. And then, but I have a question from Nancy. What is the purpose? You know, you have your couple slides ago, you had showed the flowers and you had that mesh. Could you explain a little bit about, could you explain a little bit about why you're using that?
Yeah, so that is floral caging, and we use that to space them correctly, and it's also used to keep the stems straight. So as we're working throughout the season, we'll raise it up higher as they grow just to keep those stems upright.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. We love questions, so just keep it coming. But yeah, that's great. I'm glad someone asked about that. Sorry for not mentioning it. Okay. And so, yes, so here you can see pictures from the experiment. In terms of other native bees, it's been a combination of leafcutter bees, sweat bees. There have been, I think a few different kinds. This fall, Sam's going to be putting a lot of effort towards better identifying which bees have been there. But it's been interesting to see a lot of different insects showing up on these flowers. And in addition to bees, butterflies and moths, flies. So these are those kind of syrphid hover flies, a couple different kinds of those, and then some different kinds of wasps. So beetles, lots of different types of insects that are utilizing these flowers. I don't think any major pest concerns. I know Sam mentioned seeing thrips on some of these. I don't know, Sam, were there certain flowers that seemed more vulnerable to the thrips or not necessarily?
So the calendula definitely had probably the highest population of thrips, and I was concerned at the beginning, but then as you notice more predator insects and that kind of stuff coming in, they definitely just kind of take care of it themselves. So
Yeah, because from a pest management standpoint, since people are interested in production, you never used any insecticides or anything like that. You had some issues early season with like small mammals eating seedlings, right?
I think we had rabbits and I don't know if they were voles or something else, but they were eating the seedlings.
But I'm trying to think, other than that, nothing really that was like from a production standpoint, a big issue.
And I saw lots of thrips, but I didn't see a lot of damage. So we really didn't have any of that.
Okay. Yeah, and you can see there's a lady beetle there. In terms of these beneficial insects that are predators, right? Green lacewings, spiders, nabids are a kind of predatory bug. People call them the damsel bugs. They're actually quite common in alfalfa. And they've got these piercing, sucking mouth parts. And so they will, eat a lot of aphids and things like that. They suck the juices out of them. And so lots of those kind of good guys in the high tunnels, which was really exciting to see. Okay. Questions about these or? So this is what it looks like in terms of the breakdown of which insect type is observed most often on the flowers. So this is showing you just the number of insects observed on these flowers throughout the whole season. And so it's not showing anything about the seasonality. And so you can see sort of the way these are laid out, like the most observations were on Daucus. And then you can look at the breakdown here according to color. So this yellowy color here are flies. So lots of these flies on the Daucus, which is the carrot. This is something that's also been observed in other research. So it makes sense with the flower type. And so that's something that people see a lot of. But in terms of bumblebees, they were most often seen on calendula, but also quite a bit on the celosia. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would really sort of note. In this first year, a lot more kind of bumblebees. Other native bees were comparatively rare. Sam, any other take homes you would want to share about this or about these pictures or anything?
I would just say, you can see the Matthiola has really low numbers, but that's also because once it was ready, I would cut it and then there wouldn't be Matthiola for the rest of the season. So it's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's the one where you would just get one stem.
Yeah.
Okay.
So could you make a general assumption, and I know how that word doesn't go over well in research, but could you make an assumption that if bumblebees are visiting the flowers, and I know that they're more of a long-tongued bee, but if they're visiting the flowers, would you say that honeybees would also visit those same flowers?
So I didn't even include the honeybees on this graph because I wasn't really seeing them. I think in 2019, I only had one recorded observation of the honeybees, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess, Catherine, I'm curious because you know a lot more than I do about honeybees. Has that been your experience that if something is a good resource for bumblebees, that they also will partake?
It kind of depends upon the flower. And again, bumblebees are a bit longer tongued bees than a honeybee. And I'll
Right.
see some flowers like your Perovsky, your Russian sage, where everybody's on it, and rabbit bush, everybody's on it. And so that's a shallower flower throat. And so it's easier for those insects to get to the nectaries. So it'd be curious to see that if there could be a comparison, because I could see where, if a beekeeper is in business and selling honey and maybe selling honey at a farmer's market, that they could easily incorporate the whole cut flower production thing and sell and have this value added thing going on where it's like, yeah, my bees visit these flowers and now these flowers are for sale. But yeah, I still have more for the bees. And so I could see where there would be a good parallel and a good mesh with everybody. So I was just kind of curious to see what you guys might have come up with. The flies on the Daucus doesn't surprise me at all. I would you probably had hover flies on there and everything else. So yeah, very cool.
I was
Good
out
guys.
today doing collections, and I caught a honeybee off of the Mathiola, which is definitely one of the more shallow flowers.
Mm-hmm.
I think I caught 2 honeybees on calendula a couple weeks ago, so there is some opportunity there, but I think they really don't enjoy the high tunnel, so.
Yeah, no, not so much. Not so much.
Yeah, it's gosh, it really is, I think, a really important point that we can't make too many assumptions about it given that high tunnel issue, and that growing some of these open field would give us a good idea about that. So I think that's something to really keep in mind. But
yeah, I'd love to see you guys do, the next phase where you do the cut flowers outside of the high tunnel, because that's where most people are going to do cut flowers. And we all love the high tunnels, those of us have them. But it would be nice to see how that field grown really works with the bees, and how that could be, that those 2 hobbies or 2 businesses could be meshed together.
yeah, I think that's a great point. For sure. Yeah. Okay. Oops. This shows just some of the seasonality. And so you can just see that she really does see this like build up as she gets later in the season. Just in general, there's more stuff on these flowers in that sort of late August, September timeframe. So just sort of that is what we've observed here in Laramie. Sam, is there anything else you would want to say about this piece?
Not really. You can just see the bottom part is the flower counts for those dates. So you can see as the flowers are building up in numbers, the insects are also building up in numbers.
Okay.
And then in 2020, I guess it was one of these things that it was good for this experiment, but we had so much travel restricted due to COVID-19 that the only thing Sam needed to focus on was this experiment. And so she did a lot more observations. She was going out much more often and doing her observations. So that's why the overall number of insects is a lot higher. But some of that is also that she was out there more often doing this work, since it was right here in our town. And so again, some similar patterns, some differences. So I think we still see a similar kind of composition on that Daucus flower, which is a little bit different. More of these other native bees this year than the previous year. And I know that, Sam and I had talked about, it seemed like many more of these kind of leafcutter bees, megachilids were in there on these flowers than the previous year. Really kind of consistent bumblebee use. I think they were using a lot of the different flowers. And I'm trying to remember, is the difference with Mathiola because this year you didn't cut them? Yeah.
They're still blooming now.
Yeah, so since she was not, this year was kind of an extra year to look more at the insects, and so we weren't selling the flowers to anyone, and so she just let them grow. So it still was around much longer if you're not cutting it to sell it to a florist or whoever.
So a couple, I'm full of questions.
Good.
So you mentioned megachild, I can never pronounce that. Leaf cutter bees. I can pronounce leaf cutter bees. And I have, I grow calorow, which is prairie wine cups, and that is a very cool plant, just sprawls all over the place. It's magenta colored flowers. The bees love it, it's a native. But the leaf cutter bees like to cut out that little circle of petal and haul it off. And so I have a lot of petals with big circles in them. Are you finding damage? I'm glad to hear that. I am really glad to hear that.
It's very interesting. I haven't seen any damage, so.
Okay. And then on the Mathiola, because that looks like a deep-throated flower, do you see hummingbirds on that?
So
Or is it
I haven't seen any hummingbirds inside the high tunnels, so.
okay?
Okay. And then again, a little more bouncing around, but more, she was out there much more often. So that is a little bit of what these different patterns are. But still, you can see, again, more flowers later in the season with more insects. So this is my sort of first thank you, like stop slide. I'm sorry, I lose track a little bit of this. I'm having some issues with my screen. Okay. And then I think if people have questions, but we can also get into some of the production data if people are interested in that.
The slide with your cut flower, can you go back to that? I don't know if it was.
Was it this?
Yes. That came out of the cut flower program, and you sold that to a florist who then did it for a table decoration for something at UW.
This particular image is for a wedding.
For a wedding. That's gorgeous. It's really impressive, and it's kind of makes you want to go out and start growing cut flowers, because that is just so spectacular to look at. That's very beautiful. So what sort of words of wisdom or encouragement, and again, you know, if you can add some, like, you know, what kind of fertilizer did you do in the high tunnel? What kind of watering schedule did you have in there? And so if you can give us some details on how you grew these, because I'm sure I've got a list of master gardeners over here and some non-master gardeners, and I'm sure they're probably going, well, what you fertilize them with and how often did you water them? So can you give us some of those details?
Randa, do you have this slide with the kind of the setup and production part of the cut flowers?
Yeah, I think I have it here. Let me, sorry, I'm just, okay. Trying to make it less painful for all of you.
Yeah, so that methods one.
The methods production practice slides. Yeah, do you want to
If you go to
just
the
go
next
through
one.
these? The next one, okay. I mean, do you want to talk about pinching, or was the take home that it didn't really make a big difference?
It didn't really make a big difference, but it is something we tried, so. But yeah, we just did that pinching just to see if we could get more branching on the flowers, but it overall did not have much of an effect. But this slide kind of has some of those questions that you had. We did these #1 containers, which it's less than a gallon, so they're pretty small. And we just did a bark mix as far as the potting soil. And then we watered twice daily, or it just was kind of as needed if it was really hot or cloudy or whatever happened. And we did 5 days a week with the liquid fertilizer. So we used the Jack's 15-5-15 with 150 parts per million nitrogen. And we also just added a top dressing of the Osmocote, just that slow release on top, just to have a little bit extra boost there.
Wow. So that looks like a lot of nitrogen to me, but you're growing flowers, not vegetables. So,
Yeah.
so
And
there's
we're-
a difference there.
Yeah, we're continually cutting, so we need that extra fertilization.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that your phosphorus level was so low, because I look at phosphorus as being one of those things that promotes flowering and blooms and kind of pushes that production.
Yeah, I really relied on Karen for the fertilization recommendations, so she would probably have a better answer for that, but it seemed to work well, so.
Yeah, the flowers are beautiful. I can't. Yeah.
Sam, I wonder if you can comment a bit on your, and I forget if there's a slide for it, but sort of your guides for, was it the rule of thirds or something? Like how you decide which flowers you cut and when?
Yeah,
That
I
might
think I
be.
have the slides in there. So I don't know if you can get to them really quick, but
Let me see. Not that one though.
no. So
This
the-
one. This one? Okay.
Yep. So for these first three, the Mattheola, Slocia, and Daucus, we use something called the rule of thirds for harvesting. And that basically just means that you want a third fully open, fully in color. You want a third in bud in color, and then a third just in bud. So it's easiest to see on that Mattheola, that bottom third is fully open, a third with like partially open buds, and then that top part is all bud. And then the Daucus, you kind of look at this single umbellate there. So just you want that outside ring of each umbellate to be fully open. And then the calendula and helichrysum, you kind of just want it to begin to unfold and be able to see the centers of those flowers, because once they're cut, they'll continue to open. So that's what we did with those. And that also just helps with vase life and that kind of thing. So as they're opening, you'll have a longer time period with them.
Do you, once your flowers are cut and you guys put them in that bucket, do you make a solution for them? You know, like an acid solution with a little sugar, or, I mean, what's your magic formula?
We used a floral preservative. I think it's called Floral Life. I'm not sure. I'd have to look up the name of it, but we put some of that in the bucket and then we store them in a cooler until they're ready to go, or whatever market they were going to.
And would you harvest a few times a week?
Yeah, I would harvest every other day when I was focusing on the production part. And then for Killians, I would deliver at the end of the week. And I think same thing for acres. I think it was a once a week. I would give them a couple buckets.
So how important is it to keep those flowers cut? I mean, I'm assuming if you don't cut them, they go to seed, but once they go to seed, does that stop the whole flowering plant from production?
So the first 2 seasons when I did this, I mean, I was harvesting enough to not know how that would work. And then this year, I've just been focusing on the pollinators. So I have kind of let them go further than I normally would, and they have started producing seed. And they still have pollinators coming in, and they're still coming up with new flowers. So
Okay, good to know.
yeah.
So to everybody who's listening and watching, if you have questions or thoughts or comments, you're welcome to unmute and ask, or you can put a question in the chat box and just pull up. It either says chat down at the bottom bar, or there's a more and you can pull up that and chat comes up in that. But again, if you have questions, please jump in and ask, because that's what we're here for tonight, is to encourage engagement and questions with this.
Catherine,
Yes, Leroy.
Just as a side note, one of my master gardeners from about 4 years ago started a cut flower business in Guernsey in her backyard. And, you know, so I kind of answered the question. It's outside the high tunnel. I was over there on, I think it was the 2nd of September. And it was just amazing how many flowers she had, what she was doing. She's actually doing some plant breeding. And then she's also, and I don't know what the proper title is, but on the National Monarch Butterfly Register or whatever. So, you know, it can be done in a small yard. But she's selling cut flowers. The sad part about it is her husband was one of the BN folks that were furloughed over there in Guernsey. And so they'll be moving. So I'll be losing my Sarah. But anyhow, just in the last 4 or 5 years, she's doing it outside, and she's one sharp gal. So it can be done. And that's what this whole thing's about, is diversification.
That's awesome to hear about. Thank you.
Yeah, she's, I think this is probably, and she's actually been doing some plant breeding. She showed me some of the stuff she was doing. Was selling at the farmer's market, but now people are coming to the door. I mean, they're lined up on the street just to get her a variety of flowers and stuff. So, you know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Do you remember, I know now I'm putting you on the spot, but are there certain flowers that are working really well for her that are really popular at market or something?
No, I don't. But, you know, Catherine's got my email address. I can put you in touch with her. There are places for sale. I'm just hoping that somebody will continue, because it's pretty impressive. And it's just in town in Guernsey. So it's not, you know, a great big, huge lot. It's just a city lot in Guernsey.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so great to hear about. And I think what you described too really speaks to, you know, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about these like interesting flowers that are different than what you get at the big grocery store, even at the florist, because and I think people they're excited about something new. They're excited about something that's produced here. And I know that when I'm just giving some of these flowers away, and I don't know the first thing about making nice arrangements, right? But even when I'm just giving people these flowers, they're so excited to just see these like new, beautiful flowers. And I think there's definitely interest. I don't know, Sam, if you want to say more about that, but florists are interested, people at the market are interested. It's really cool to see the enthusiasm.
I have a question, Samantha. Are there any honeybee colonies in proximity to your tunnels? And if not, do you know how close the closest colony is to your outdoor lab?
Yeah, I believe I looked this up at some point, the registered beehives and that kind of thing. I'm not sure what the closest one was, but I think it was outside the normal range of what a honeybee would normally do. So I don't have an exact number though.
Okay.
And so we're at the Laramie Research Center, so we're on that 30th and Harney area, and right beside that there's a lot of recreation areas. There's a big golf course. There is some residential areas, so there might be some bees there, but I imagine they would be finding stuff in the gardens and stuff that are in those residential areas.
Yeah, I'm surprised the students at Acres haven't put up a beehive or a couple beehives yet. That's kind of would be appropriate for those guys in that area.
Yeah, and then I don't think that they were allowed to work this year, so I might have been one of the only resources really in that area, which is why I saw more honeybees around, but not necessarily on the flowers.
Okay. To everybody who's watching still, this has been recorded and it will be posted on the Laramie County mastergardener.org, lcmg.org website. And it'll be also posted at the Laramie County, Wyoming, University of Wyoming Extension website. So I've got both links there on the chat page. So if you want to go back and watch this, by all means, go ahead. And then you guys have your contact information. So if they want to get in touch with you guys.
Yeah, so there's my email. I
Yep.
think if you do want to know about, and Sam is, I'll put it in the chat. Is there an S at the end? S? Nobes?
Snopes.
Nobes. This is Sam's, and Sam will be, you know, graduating at probably in the spring, and then she'll hopefully go on to some really awesome job in the cut flower industry somewhere in the United States, which is her goal. And so I do think Karen Panter is the best person in terms of if you do want to know more about how you grow these flowers or seed sources. She might have some good ideas on that, which we didn't talk about. But I'm definitely excited to keep talking about bees with you all. So please reach out if you are interested.
Yeah, any questions, thoughts, comments? We're welcome to jump in and add to the discussion, or if you got a question, you can type it into the chat box or whatever. Questions are welcome. They're encouraged.
Hello, Ed here. I joined kind of late, but do you have a list of flowers that attract honeybees that grow at a higher altitude?
So Ed, what's a higher altitude? These were grown at 7,200 feet. Where are you at?
It's up in Boulder, so it's like 8,000. So slightly higher, not a whole lot. But I didn't know if there was like a resource somewhere besides here. And thanks for putting this on. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I can quickly find a link. I know that University of Wyoming Extension did put together a very focused pollinator sort of book guide in the last few years that I think includes some good plant lists and ideas about seed mixes and things. I don't know if that's quite targeted enough for what you're interested in, but I can try to find a link in the final minutes and share it. So I don't have any specific thing that we've created or that I would suggest, but we've relied a lot on resources also from Xerces Society and places like that. But I know that specificity with what grows well at those altitudes is important. And I'm not sure if these guides would get at that. Another thing a resource that I don't know if Catherine, do you have like a mailing list if I am able to send you something after the talk today?
Sure. And the guide you're talking about is the pollinator resource guide. I just put that link in chat.
Okay.
So, and that is an awesome guide, and it lists just the arm's length of plants that you can grow, both annuals and perennials. 8,000 feet, your growing season is pretty tight, so you're looking a lot more at trying to push the annuals than you are a lot of perennials. But you're a little more challenged up there for sure. But go to this, it's in the chat box, go to that website. It's a very well done, very nicely published book. And yeah, worth checking out.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice resource. But yeah, when we've done some past projects, yeah, I forget the name of the seed company now, Apple something in Colorado.
Applewood.
Applewood, yeah, that was another place I looked to try to just get some ideas about what some of the recommendations were. So kind of this document, Xerces Society, if you're not familiar with them, and then just seed suppliers that are working with people in their region. But
yeah, Applewood would be an excellent resource to go through, and they're in Golden, Colorado. So they're your next door neighbor there, Ed, and they can help you.
I've got my notes, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Last chance.
I really appreciate all of you taking time to spend with us and inviting us to talk about our work to you on this Wednesday night. It's been really great to get all your questions and ideas and the questions that stumped us, which we'll go and try to learn more about, and really nice ideas for how we can think about our work in the future. And I know I really appreciate all the great work Master Gardeners are doing out in the state. So thanks to all of you for all the awesome work you do.
Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone, again, thanks for joining us tonight. Randa, Samantha, great program. Can't ever beat, pictures of pretty cut flowers. I mean, that's great. So everybody, thanks. Have a great evening. And I'll be back again with another program, and I'll just keep everyone informed. So again, thanks for joining us. Everyone have a good night.
Thanks
Thank
again,
you all.
Catherine.